civil. And I think moving on to the first question, which I think is a really important one, what is your definition of critical race theory, and what are the sources for your definition?
I'll hop in. My definition of critical race, well, not my definition, the definition of critical race theory, it's a body of knowledge and vocabulary developed around the notion that America is systemically racist, and that systemic racism leads to a system of white privilege and general bias, and that the only way to mitigate the effects of this bias is to practice anti-racism. Color blindness is seen as an obsolete idea in saying that it's ignoring a problem, and that bias or racism by whites is both conscious and unconscious. And therefore, because of these unconscious biases, unless the majority race or oppressor, as they say, consciously counteracts those instincts, that they will by de facto oppress the minority, and that racism can only be assigned to the majority because racism incorporates implied power in order for it to be racism. That's in general. I could go more specifically, but I think, you know, that was kind of covered in the slides. From a very simple statement is it's just a point of view is all it is. It started out in legal circles as to say, okay, if this black kid robs a drugstore, how about if I assume that racism is involved, that influences his life, that it's everywhere, that led to these behaviors? And these kind of play scenarios were used to figure out alternate ways of prosecution and punishment, et cetera, and it just evolved into a whole science. But it's just to say, assume this is true and see what happens. Like, assume the boogeyman's true. Let's talk about it in form of vocabulary, or that, you know, Jedis exist. It was the same category of things.
And we're going to move to Atif now, who has his hand raised.
Sure. Thanks, Kate. I'm going to answer the question a little bit differently, because critical race theory definition, you know, is there. Mr. Lott referenced the true definition of it. In addition to critical race theory, there's also critical gender theory. There's critical theory in general, and that's where a lot of the other theories branched out. So there's critical class and economics theory. Basically, the whole concept of critical theory in general is that you know, there are some groups of people who are at a disadvantage versus others. It can be applied anywhere in the world. Dynamics are very different. In the situation that we are in, you know, we're obviously talking about race and so forth. And it was referenced that, you know, what data exists or what doesn't exist. You know, my question or thinking behind this is that school discipline, if you look at suspension rates, and if you look at expulsion rates, they're 3 times as likely for Black children compared to their peers in Prince William County. And this is a study that was commissioned by a Republican majority even before I got into office and Governor Northam came into office. So there are data sets, and that's just one example where, why is that? So to really understand why is that, and to get to the bottom of it, you have to think differently so you can address the needs of all children thoughtfully. That's just one data set. So there's multiple data sets that exist that clearly show, but we're not asking the right questions. We shouldn't be asking what is critical race theory. We should be asking is why are certain people so worked up about it? Look, I mean, this is a backlash to people asking for fair treatment, to what's happening with police brutality or other modern day school segregation. People are asking for fair treatment. And this is just another iteration of the histories of the past where there's a backlash, this vitriolic and hateful. Let's just be honest here.
90 seconds are up.
All right. And are we going to allow responses by panelists who have already spoken, or would you prefer to allow panelists who haven't spoken to go first?
Cynthia? I would say get all the people. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yes, allow everyone to respond to the question.
Okay.
Yeah,
Once.
please.
Okay. Well, Martha or Dr. Johri, do you want to jump in? Before Paul, I see he has his hand raised.
Do you need to have the question repeated? Kate, maybe you could repeat the question that they're being asked to respond to?
Sure.
I,
The question, just as a reminder to everyone, is what is your definition of critical race theory and what are the sources for your definition? And Martha, did you want to chime in?
well, I don't want to take my time going through the definition of critical race theory because I think I kind of covered that in my presentation, and what my sources are, and my sources are the founders, as like Paul. I just want to respond a little bit to something Secretary said, and that is that he did bring up critical theory. I'm glad he did. That is the basis. It comes from the Frankfurt School. I am a broken record on Marxism. It is not just about fairness. It's about dismantling and deconstructing. Those words have been used already tonight. Dismantling and deconstructing Western culture. Critical theory is Marxism, period. And every form of it, critical race theory, critical gender theory, critical queer theory, all the studies that come out of it in academia, it is all based on Marxism to dismantle Western culture because they are socialists. It is to usher in socialism. I, as an American, I don't want that. So do I fear it? I don't want it to happen, and I think it's winning. So.
And Martha, before I go to Dr. Johri, we did have a question from the audience just asking what your experience in education is. The question goes, is she an educator or has she ever worked in a school system? And I just wanted to give you the chance to respond because I introduced you as a business owner.
Oh, that's well, and frankly, Denny added that. Denny, you can fess up to that, because if we're talking about identity, I do not identify as a business owner. I have a small business, but I do not identify as that. I identify as a mom. I was a stay-at-home mom. My business was secondary. I spent hours and hours and hours, countless hours in school, from preschool through 12th grade, volunteering, PTAs, you name it. And then I was a substitute for a little bit. So my only experience in education is as a parent and a little bit as a substitute.
Gotcha. And Dr. Johri, did you want to respond to this question?
Well, I just want to say that it's really not relevant to my practitioner's lens, so I'll pass.
Okay, great. And Atif, you have your hand raised.
Just a 15-second comment, if that's okay, Kate.
Sure.
And I don't think you have to be an educator to care about education, right? Dr. Johri and I are credentialed, but I think families, business owners, it doesn't matter. If you care, you care. But my question is that I agree. I mean, I don't want our society to be dismantled. I am opposed to Marxism and communism, but we teach that in school. We teach those theories in school. So that's what I'm saying, is that's why I'm confused, is that in our curriculum, we have taught for decades about socialism, communism, Nazi Germany, and so forth. So why this obsession with critical race theory? It just really messes with I just don't get it.
Okay. Well, I think we're going to
Mr. Lott.
Yeah, we're going to move to Paul, and then I think we'll move on to the next question. So Paul, go ahead.
I can tell you why it's a big deal to me. I was raised in poor Black communities, 100% Black communities. I have the stripes to prove it. Stabbed at 9 years old, almost bled out. Arm broken by a bunch of white kids that tried to beat me to death when I was in the kindergarten. I've lived it. I've lived this life, and I still ended up making it to Harvard. And I can tell you for a fact that the principles of critical race theory have always been accepted by the Black community for as long as I've been alive. And that though the idea that America is systemically racist and against you is the #1 gang recruiting message in every single city that I have worked in. I have used my own money to spend a year in some of the most violent school systems in this country, working with students. And the #1 thing that I have to fight is this notion of systemic racism, white privilege, and the conclusion they put is, why work so hard in education to get educated if you can just sell this drug, join this gang, do this? That's why it's important. This message is destructive to Black Americans, period. That's why we came out against it. And as for data, Black cultures are different. To say that the data says that Black Americans or minorities are how should we discipline more often? You need to come back and prove that there are instances of undisciplined white activity before that number means anything. Sometimes the reason why Blacks are more disciplined is because they commit more offenses. There are almost 7,000 murders that take place of Blacks, and 6,600 are murders of Black on Black. So we have to look at it's too complicated to go into here, but the tenets are wrong. And there's a difference between teaching that socialism is X or communism is X, as opposed to training your teachers to spot bias, racism, where you have no data to show that bias is the problem. I presented data to the Prince William County Racial and Social Justice Commission. The data shows from 2008 that all of this racial nonsense, Prince William County is a model in terms of the academic performance that it has pulled out of its minority students. It should be a model for the nation, and none of it involved race-based education.
Okay, I think that is a good amount of time